The mud was not just on the ground, it was in the air, a thick, damp mist that clung to everything. Thomas sat with his knees pulled to his chest, his boots submerged in a freezing, stagnant pool that had collected at the bottom of the trench. He pulled the letter from his pocket. The paper was soft, nearly pulp, the edges frayed from constant handling. He traced the lines with a thumb, but the ink had bled into the fibers, turning words into dark, illegible smears. He knew the lines by heart, yet he looked at them again, searching for a clarity that no longer existed. Above, the sky was a bruised, heavy gray. Every few seconds, the earth vibrated, a low thrum that rattled his teeth. He folded the paper, tucked it back into the inner pocket, and pressed his palm against his chest to keep it dry. He gripped his rifle, the cold metal biting into his palms, and stared at the jagged line of the trench wall. The sky changed first. A dull, rolling thunder erupted from the horizon, and the heavy gray clouds ignited, turning a violent, bruised orange. The light bled down into the trench, casting long, frantic shadows against the mud walls. Thomas looked up, his eyes squinting against the sudden glare. The ground beneath him bucked, sending a spray of dirt into his face. He reached for his rifle, his knuckles white against the wood. Then, the sound came. A sharp, shrill whistle pierced the air, silencing the distant rumble. It was a thin, piercing note that demanded movement. Thomas stood. His legs felt heavy, as if the mud were trying to pull him back into the earth. He looked at the wooden ladder leaning against the wall. The rungs were slick with moisture and grime. He took a breath, the air tasting of sulfur and wet soil. He gripped the top rung, his boots finding purchase. He pulled himself upward, his head rising above the lip of the trench. The world outside was a landscape of fire and smoke. He did not look back at the safety of the hole. He hauled himself over the edge, his boots hitting the uneven ground, and stepped forward into the roar. The air outside was a wall of heat and flying debris. Thomas sprinted, his boots sliding on the slick, churned earth. Every step was a battle against suction. The ground shook with a rhythmic, violent force that threatened to knock him off balance. He kept his head low, eyes fixed on the jagged silhouette of the wire ahead. Suddenly, his toe caught the rim of a discarded helmet buried in the muck. He pitched full, his hands slamming into the thick, gray sludge. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. He did not get up. He could not. The shelling had intensified, turning the ground into a churning sea of earth and iron. He pushed himself onto his stomach and began to crawl, dragging his body through the heavy, cold mud. It coated his skin, thick and suffocating. Around him, the rest of his squad emerged from the haze, moving in the same desperate, low-slung rhythm. There was no sound of voices, only the heavy, ragged breathing of men pushing through the mire, and the constant, deafening roar of the artillery. He focused on the movement of the boots in front of him, ignoring the fire that bloomed in the distance. The heavy fire slackened as Thomas reached the jagged line of the enemy trench. He saw a depression in the earth, a crater carved by a recent shell, and dove into the center. The walls of the hole were packed tight, shielding him from the worst of the blast. He pressed his back against the cold, damp earth and reached for his ammunition pouch. His fingers fumbled with the latch, pulling it open. He counted the rounds by touch. 3. Only 3 left. He checked his watch. But the thick, black smoke overhead had swallowed the sun, leaving the dial in near total darkness. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes, listening. The roar of the artillery had faded into a distant, rhythmic thumping. In the sudden quiet, a new sound emerged. The distinct, sharp crunch of boots on loose gravel moving slowly toward his position. Thomas stopped breathing. He reached for the bayonet at his side, his grip tightening until his knuckles ached. The crunching sound grew louder, rhythmic and deliberate. He pressed himself deeper into the crater, his eyes fixed on the rim above. A shadow detached itself from the smoke and fell across the edge of the crater. It stopped directly over him. The shadow shifted, and Thomas did not wait for a second invitation. He surged upward, his bayonet leading the way, his entire weight behind the thrust. There was a sharp, guttural sound as he made contact, a frantic collision of bodies in the narrow space of the crater. The air filled with the smell of wet earth and something metallic. They grappled, limbs tangling, boots kicking against the loose dirt of the crater walls. It was a blur of desperate, uncoordinated violence. Thomas felt a heavy blow to his shoulder, the impact sending a jolt of pain through his arm, but he held his ground. He shoved, his muscles screaming with the effort, until the weight above him gave way. He fell backward, his back hitting the opposite slope of the crater with a dull thud. The struggle ended as abruptly as it had begun. Silence rushed back in, heavy and thick. Thomas lay there, his chest heaving, his lungs burning for oxygen. He stared up at the swirling, smoke-choked sky, his vision tunneling. Slowly, he brought his hands into view. They were slick, coated in a dark, viscous mixture of mud and iron. He rubbed his fingers together, feeling the grit, the cold, and the reality of the moment. He was still breathing. He was still here. The shock of the encounter settled into his bones, leaving him trembling in the quiet, empty crater. Thomas pushed himself upright, his muscles stiff and protesting. He wiped his palms against his legs, but the dark stains remained, etched into his skin. He looked toward the rim of the crater, expecting to see the familiar shapes of his squad, the movement of men advancing through the smoke. There was nothing. He climbed out of the crater, his boots sinking into the churned earth. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the gray expanse of no man's land. The fog had thickened, swirling in low, suffocating banks that obscured everything beyond a few paces. He shouted, his voice cracking, but the sound was swallowed instantly. No reply came, no whistle, no distant chatter of rifles. He walked forward, his pace uneven, searching for a sign of life, a discarded pack, or a footprint. He found only the cratered landscape, scarred and empty. The silence was absolute, a heavy weight that pressed against his ears. He stopped again, listening for the rhythm of the war, but the front line had vanished. The realization settled over him like the fog itself. He was not just separated, he was untethered. He stood alone in the center of the devastation, the only living thing in a world that had forgotten his name. He took a breath, the air tasting of ash, and looked toward the horizon. Thomas turned his back on the direction of the front. The artillery fire had faded to a low, rhythmic thrumming, a heartbeat of a world he no longer served. He walked with a heavy, deliberate gait, his boots dragging through the sludge. Every step felt like a shedding of weight. He passed the skeletal remains of a farmhouse, its walls collapsed into piles of jagged masonry. He moved through the debris, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the gray sky met the earth. Near the edge of the ruin, he found the stone well. It was cracked, choked with weeds and debris, but the water inside remained deep and dark. He stopped. The rifle felt like a leaden anchor in his grip. He looked at the weapon, then at the open space beyond the ruins. He did not hesitate. He let the rifle slide from his numb fingers. It hit the water with a hollow, final splash. He did not look back. He wiped his hands on his sides, feeling the sudden lightness of his grip. He stepped away from the well, his pace quickening toward the distant fog. The landscape stretched out, a vast expanse of muted tones and shifting shadows. Thomas moved steadily, his form growing smaller against the backdrop of the desolate fields. The gray mist clung to the earth, rising to meet the low-hanging clouds until the boundary between ground and sky blurred into a single, seamless shade of charcoal. He walked until his movements became rhythmic, then mechanical, and finally imperceptible. The terrain seemed to reach out, folding him into its vast, indifferent embrace. He became a mere flicker of motion, then a static point, and eventually he vanished entirely into the gray. The world he left behind grew silent. Decades passed in the space between heartbeats. The dust settled on the ruins, and the earth reclaimed the trenches. Time moved forward, turning the sharp edges of memory into the soft, worn pages of history. In a quiet, sun-drenched attic, far from the mud and the smoke, a hand reached into a wooden chest. Fingers brushed against the rough texture of a leather-bound book, pulling it from the darkness of long-forgotten things. The historian opened the cover, the paper dry and brittle under the light. The ink on the final page remained clear, a testament to a choice made in the heart of a storm. The diary lay open, its pages holding the weight of a life that had stepped out of the history books. The historian traced the final lines of the diary with a steady finger. The entry was brief, dated July 1st, written in a hand that had grown tired but certain. It described the act of walking away, not as a retreat, but as a deliberate turning point. The words detailed the moment the rifle hit the water, the feeling of the mud falling away, and the decision to stop the cycle of violence that had consumed the world. It was a testament to a man who had looked at the horizon and chosen a path of his own making. The historian closed the book, the sound of the cover meeting the binding sharp in the quiet room. This was not a record of a battle won or a territory gained. It was a record of a man who had become a ghost, choosing to vanish rather than continue the carnage. We do not know his name, and we will never see his face, yet his choice remains. It echoes through the decades, a silent protest against the noise of war. Today, we look back at the trenches, not just to count the losses, but to acknowledge those who stepped out of the fog and into the silence. Their story is the story of every soldier who found the courage to stop. They are the ones who refused to be defined by the violence of their time. They are the ones who walked toward the horizon and never looked back. In the quiet of the history books, their choice remains a beacon, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there is always the possibility of a different path. They chose peace, and in doing so, they found a way to be free.